President. Colleagues, today on the Senate floor, we are expecting to see some outrageous attacks on my home state of California and important provisions of the historic Clean Air Act. And while it's not too late to turn back at this moment, I think it's important for all of my colleagues to know that I will be back here again and again and again throughout this process to make sure that everyone knows what these votes mean, not just for the precedent and procedures of the United States Senate, but for the health of my constituents in California, and about the real threat to human life that comes when California is denied the ability to control toxic air and greenhouse gas emissions. But before I do, I want senators and the American people to fully understand what we are about to witness on the Senate floor. Put aside all the procedural back and forth. I'll get back to that in a few minutes. But overall, it's actually pretty simple. Senate Republicans are preparing to vote to overrule the parliamentarian, the nonpartisan umpire, referee for the Senate, that lets us know what's in order, what's not in order. Senate Republicans are preparing to vote to overrule the parliamentarian. They'll argue that they're not, but that is indeed what's happening here. Now, they want to do that in order to bypass the filibuster, in order to gut the Clean Air Act. Now, as I stand here right now, those joint resolutions that are going to be before us are subject to Rule 22 of the Senate, and therefore subject to the 60-vote filibuster threshold. They are subject to debate. They are subject to amendments that's already been determined. But in this moment, they are in regular legislation and are subject, as a result, to the legislative filibuster. But if we see happen today what we expect to see happen, the status of these same bills, maybe later this evening, will be very, very different. If Senate Republicans have the way that we expect them to do, all of a sudden these same measures that are subject to the legislative filibuster and debate and amendments will all of a sudden be expedited procedurally. No amendments allowed. Very limited debate. Colleagues, as I said here yesterday, it's not just the why Republicans are willing to endanger the health of Californians, it's also the how they're doing it that is threatening. A bit of history. In 1967, the Clean Air Act passed this body under regular order by a vote of 88 to 12. In 1990, the landmark Clean Air Act amendments passed the Senate 89 to 11. Overwhelming bipartisan support. But today, Republicans are trying to pass these bills to gut California's Clean Air Act authority under a simple 50-vote threshold. They're plotting to overturn the Senate parliamentarians' determination, plain and simple. Why is that significant? Well, the majority leader said it himself at the very start of this Congress, that when it comes to overriding the parliamentarian, quote, that's totally akin to killing the filibuster. We can't go there. People need to understand that, period, end quote. But fast forward to this week, and we've heard all sorts of excuses and explanations and mental gymnastics as to why all of a sudden overturning the parliamentarian is not akin to killing the filibuster. That's a complete 180-degree shift. But in one way, I guess, it might be right. No, this isn't the same as killing the legislative filibuster. This actually goes way, way beyond that. Because first, they're doing more than going nuclear on the parliamentarian. They're going nuclear on the Congressional Review Act itself. It's true that the parliamentarian does not make law. Under the Constitution, the House and the Senate set their own procedures limited by the requirements set in the Constitution. For the good of the order and an actual functioning democracy, we have all come to rely on the parliamentarian to call balls and strikes and set the rules of the road. But the Congressional Review Act is a law, and it says that all points of order are waived during a CRA resolution. And that's what we're debating right now, an actual CRA resolution relating to hydrogen fuel. Now, I oppose this particular resolution, but at least it is following the law and Senate procedure. But what is about to happen is going to be against the law and against Senate procedure. As I understand it, Senate Republicans are preparing to have this Senate go nuclear not just once but twice. First, we'll go nuclear and overturn the rule on points of order during a CRA, which is in the law. Then Republicans plan to go nuclear a second time to throw out the rule book and use the CRA against any agency action that any agency submits. No questions asked. So like I said, this goes way beyond just the legislative filibuster. So let's play it out a little bit so we're clear as to what this would lead to. Under this logic, the Trump administration could send an endless stream of non-rule actions to Congress, going back to 1996, including vaccine approvals. After all, we have an HHS secretary with more than a spotty history as it pertains to the health and safety of vaccines. The administration could send broadcast licenses, because we know this is an administration that is not shy about attacking anybody in the media community that disagrees with their agenda. We could see this administration send us merger approvals, again, not just those that are pending, but going back to 1996. And any number of government decisions that apply on President Trump's long list of enemies. All it would take is a minimum of 30 senators to introduce related bills, and the Senate would be bogged down voting on agency actions, large and small, all day long. Is that how we want to spend our days here in the Senate? Voting on every vaccine approval because Secretary Kennedy decides to send them to Congress? And what about the next Democratic administration? All bets would be off. Consider mining permits. Consider fossil fuel project approvals. Consider LNG export licenses or offshore leases, IRS tax policies, foreign policy, and every Project 2025 or DOGE disruption or overreach. Every agency action that Democrats don't like, whether it's a rule or not, and no matter how much time has passed, would be fair game if Republicans go through with this and establish this precedent. So let's take a step back. Republicans are admitting that they don't have the votes to pass these California resolutions under the Senate rules that the parliamentarian says apply in this case. So they'll overrule the parliamentarian. Might not throw out the rule book altogether. By voting to go nuclear on the CRA, they're ignoring the law, not just Senate rules, but the text of the law itself. By voting to overrule the parliamentarian, they're saying that the rules are whatever Republicans say they are, not what the parliamentarian has determined. The majority here can tell themselves whatever they want, and they can twist themselves into pretzels and nuts to try and justify these reckless actions. But despite their smoke and mirrors approach to confuse the general public, we're all going to see it today with our own eyes if they go forward. The majority wants to go nuclear to bypass the filibuster and pass a bill for the first time in Senate history. It has happened for nominations before. It has happened on a few procedural questions before, but never on a bill or 3 bills. Never. And if this happens under a Republican majority, it would actually be pretty ironic. The party that claims to be the staunch defender of the filibuster threw the rules aside as soon as it was convenient. Now, I've been honest on my views of the filibuster. I do think it needs to change overall going forwards, but it was my colleagues on the other side of the aisle who fought hard to keep it. Well, there's about to be a new precedent on the record, unless we step back at the last minute. And it will stand as a guidepost going forward. Now, Democrats are in the minority today, but Democrats will be in the majority again someday. Maybe later, maybe sooner. But we will certainly not forget what happens here today. History will not forget. Mr. President, California will not forget what's at stake today either. I yield for now, but I will be back.
Mr. President.
The senator from California.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank my colleague, Senator Padilla, for his eloquent speech on this subject. Today, I want to talk about what's taking place in this chamber, and I want to talk about it in 2 respects. I want to talk about what it will mean for the American people in terms of the air that we breathe and the water that we drink. That's the most important thing. But then I want to also talk about what it will mean for this institution, for this Senate, what it will mean for the filibuster, what it will mean for whether things can get passed on a simple majority vote at the behest of the oil industry or any other special interest, or whether things in the future will continue to require 60 votes to get through this body. So let's start with the first and most important thing. What does the repeal of California's clean air waiver, that is, its right to set its own standards for the air that we breathe, what does this mean for the people of California? What does this mean for the people of the United States? Well, this is downtown Los Angeles in 1955. Now, I don't remember 1955. I didn't come around until 1960. But I do remember air that looked a lot like this when I moved to Los Angeles. I remember days when there were smog alerts. We still have some of those. I remember when it was unhealthy air to breathe, and people were advised not to go outside if they didn't need to, and kids couldn't go out on recess because the air quality was so bad. But this is what places in California like Los Angeles and many places in the San Joaquin Valley looked like just a few decades ago. The San Joaquin Valley, where so much of the food of the nation is grown, these areas have experienced the rapid rise of personal automobiles and the expansion of our population, America's West, its suburbs, and its cities. On days like this, you just couldn't walk outside sometimes without hacking. If you had asthma or a breathing problem, it was even more severe. And California families, through no fault of their own, were on the front lines of a health risk unseen since the worst days of the Industrial Revolution pollution. The smog was so bad that in one instance, mass panic broke out in California because there was a belief that there was some kind of chemical weapons attack. Now, this was in part due to these amazing increases in population, but it was also our unique topography. The San Gabriel Mountains in Los Angeles, the Sierra Nevadas in the Central Valley or for the Central Valley, they trap fossil fuel emissions and keep smog clouds hanging over our cities where they may not hang over other parts of the nation. So the San Gabriel Mountains, for those of us in LA, but the Verdugos and other mountain ranges and the Sierra Nevadas have an impact on the Central Valley. And all that means that 10 million Californians are living in areas that are under distinct and elevated threats from air pollution. And what that has meant historically is higher rates of respiratory issues like asthma and chronic lung disease. It has meant increased risk of heart disease, chronic headaches, immune system issues, and most significantly, increased cancer risks. And that is multiplied by us living now on the front lines of the climate crisis. We have devastating and year-round fire dangers that put millions of other pollutants into our air. So we need, deserve, and reserve the right as Californians to do something about our air. And in fact, this is why California became the first state in the nation to regulate the emissions of automobiles back in 1966, because we understood then, as we do now, the risks that Californians face if we don't take action. And over the past 60 years, since our skies looked like this, California has led on this issue. And now we're being targeted for it. And what will the cost of that be? By revoking California's right to protect its citizens from dirty air, we face not just dirtier air, but we also face a sicker society. The American Lung Association projected that our nation's moving to zero-emission vehicles in the next decade would generate more than $1 trillion in public health benefits and save more than 100,000 people from premature death. So this is really the heart of the question for this body, and that is, what's more valuable to us? Is it the unfettered right to pollute the skies and make them look like this? Or do we want to save about $1 trillion in money we would have to spend otherwise on treating asthma and treating lung cancer and treating heart disease that's caused by air like this? That electric vehicle requirement can save more than 100,000 people from premature death. So I guess we have to ask ourselves, how much is life worth? What would it be worth to us to be able to live a few years longer? And I suppose the answer to that question depends on, well, what kind of life is that? What kind of health are we in? But I would say a few more years is worth a lot. It's worth a lot. It's certainly worth more than contributions from the oil industry to be able to live a little longer, to be able to live a little healthier. And by targeting California, as this effort is doing, which comprises 11% of the nation, and our goal of decarbonizing our transportation sector, we are sowing poison seeds for the future. Seeds that will grow to be more asthma and more sickness and more hospitalizations and more death. That is the bleak but blatant reality of what we are debating here today. If the Republicans go nuclear to repeal California's clean air rules, that is what this will mean. It will mean shorter lives, poorer quality of life, because what we're breathing in the air And ultimately, when they strike down clean water rules, what we're drinking in our water is going to be dirtier, and the American people are going to be more plagued by a whole variety of cancers. Now, I mentioned the term going nuclear. What does that mean? This gets to the second point I want to make today, which is how the Republican majority intends to go about repealing California's ability to set the standards for its own air. That is, how does the Republican majority intend to foist its will on millions of people in other states? How are they determined to overturn states' rights? How are they determined that the federal government should tell a state, no, you can't protect your people from air pollution? Not to that degree you can't, because we answer to a higher authority, and that higher authority is called the oil industry. So how are they going to do it? Because in this body, for better or worse, it generally takes 60 votes to get things done. That is the filibuster. It requires 60 votes. And to repeal California's law, if you were to take that step, it requires 60 votes. Don't just take my word for it. We asked the parliamentarian, who's the expert, does this require 60 votes? Is this subject to the filibuster? And the answer is, yes, it does. Well, you would think that'd be the end of the story, but you can overrule the parliamentarian, say the parliamentarian is wrong, and then reduce the threshold to 50 votes. Now, you might ask, how is that possible? Is the filibuster really that fragile that whenever it is ruled that you need 60 votes, you can simply overrule the parliamentarian? And the answer is yes. The rule is that fragile, which means if Republicans move to go nuclear, to overturn the parliamentarian, to do away with the filibuster, to do away with California's clean air, they'll be setting a precedent that at any time and for any reason, for any state, for any rule, for any non-rule, for any waiver, for any license, for any grant, for anything, a new majority can simply say, well, we'd like to vote on this with 50 votes, and if the parliamentarian says it takes 60, you just vote to overturn the parliamentarian. So that is the import of what we're doing today, which is we are setting a precedent that the filibuster is essentially now meaningless, because if you can do away with the filibuster to do away with one state's clean air, well, you can pretty much do away with the filibuster for everything and anything. So that is the momentous nature of what's happening today. The majority here may force Californians to breathe air like that again, and the majority here may decide they're getting rid of the filibuster. Now, getting back to the underlying merits here, the American Lung Association found that our transition to cleaner air and zero-emission vehicles would result in 13 million fewer lost workdays in the next 10 years. So what does that mean, 13 million? It means 13 million less times that you're so sick you can't go to work. You get 13 million more days of health with these clean air rules. Think about that. 13 million more healthy days for you, the American people, if we achieve our emissions goals. Now, since my swearing in 6 months ago to the Senate, I've had the privilege of visiting communities all over California, talking to Californians who are on the front lines of this. And yes, some are environmental activists, and yes, some work on science and climate issues. But there are others too. And they are the people who put food in your grocery stores. They're the people who spend so much of their days outside, breathing the only air available to them. They're the people who will be sicker. Some of the people who will be sicker, work less, maybe die earlier if we let the fossil fuel industry win this week. The people who spend hundreds of hours each month on their hands and knees making sure that all the rest of us can have fresh berries and greens and other crops that California puts on your plate. I am, of course, talking about farm workers. I invite any of my colleagues to consider what millions more pounds of smog in our air of the next decade will do to them. And of course, it's not just farm workers. It's all of us. All of us who spend time outdoors. All of us who can't help but be outdoors. All of us are going to be breathing in dirtier air. All of us are going to be suffering more sick days. All of us are going to be plagued by more cancers if we repeal the rules that each state gets to set that has a waiver or wants to join California's healthier air rules. That will be the repercussion. Used to be there was a bipartisan consensus in favor of cleaner air. It wasn't just Democrats. Richard Nixon, who founded the EPA, Pete Wilson, Ronald Reagan, they all understood the importance of the environment and clean air and clean water. They helped California take the environmental movement and make it mainstream. We got pollutants out of our air and out of our water and out of our communities. Where is that party now? Where is the party that helped write the Clean Air Act? Where's the party that says Congress should not meddle in what one state is doing to govern itself? And what will happen when you lose the majority and Democrats have the opportunity to follow this precedent? What will happen to your state? We decide we don't like your state's rule on mifepristone, or we don't like the fact that your state got a license to export liquid natural gas, or we don't like a grant that your state got in transportation, or we don't like some rule that benefits your state. Will you argue to us that, oh no, you can't overturn the parliamentarian? Will that be your argument? Because that fight will be over. So I will remember where I am today. I will remember what we're doing today. I think we all would and will. I hope it's not the day that we made it easier to pollute California's skies. I hope it's not the date we made it easier to make water filled with more forever chemicals like PFAS. I hope it's not the day we decided that we could eliminate a state's right to control the quality of the air that their citizens breathe or the water they drink. And I hope it's not the day we decided that it was worth getting rid of the filibuster to satisfy the fossil fuel industry. And with that, I yield back.